取能在40分之内。
什么？
争取能在40分之内结束。
昨天美国说那个去乌干达监督他们的选举，
我看到
没有拿到签证，然后
It's very ironic.
说啊，你们没有 transparency， 这个不行，你们的选举，大家都说，哎呀，算了，我们回来好好管管我们自己吧。
The world is changing.
这个 damage to the
对他们自己呢，先把自己的选举搞好。
对啊，这个。
然后那个乌干达的总统发言人说，哎，上一次我们派我们的监督员去华盛顿什么时候？我们还没去我们的监督员呢。看看你们的选举到底怎么进行的。是，以后说话就腰杆没那么直了，大家都嘲笑他们。
对美国那个民主体制的打击是很厉害的，
形象。
所以那些民主党那么恨他，真的
是民主党尤其这个在意这些事情是吧？所以坚持
还不止，还有一个 personal， 就是说他昨天我看有人昨天那个有讲到的是，就是说，可以好 ，all right。
Hello and welcome to.
就说他们就这些 lawmakers 都是很 powerful 的，他们从来没有经历过自己的甚至自己的生命受到威胁的。For several hours, a few lawmakers really think they're going to die.
Massive loss.
Yeah, so it's very personal to these people, right?
我说是国仇家恨。
So they won't let him go. They're going to go after him.
对
，relentlessly.
个人生死的死的家国家。
It's very personal now.
Hello and welcome to our live stream. I'm Tuyin in Beijing. First of all, apologies for a change of topic. Previously, we were scheduled, to talk about where Jack Ma is. But given the result of the vote by the U.S. House of Representatives to impeach President Donald Trump for a second time, which is unprecedented and more relevant and important to this world at this moment right now. So we decide to shift our attention to this headline story. Fortunately, we got 3 very experienced experts who've been following this story. So without further ado, let me introduce them to you. Here in the studio, we have Dr. John Gahn, Professor of Economics of the University of International Business and Economics, as well as Mr. Xu Qingduo, Senior Fellow with the Beijing-based Pan-Global Institution. And on the line, more specifically via video link, we got Harold Bookman, Dean of the Intelligentsia Research Institute for Switzerland. Welcome to all of you. First of all, to Harold Bookman. Harold, we've got President Trump being impeached for willful inciting an insurrection. So is it a symbolic move given, there is only 1 week left to the inauguration of a new president?
The Congress finds the president to be guilty of inciting an insurrection, that has very strong legal implications. And as I understand the US Constitution, it is the Congress only who has the right to judge the president on whether that was an impeachable action. So after Biden is inaugurated, after Donald Trump isn't president anymore, even then there is still the legal implication just from a justice point of view to make the point whether he was or not. So sorry, can you mic why myself?
Sorry for the connection. We got a signal problem here. So, John, what's your interpretation of this result? Is it symbolic?
No, I don't think so. I think the purpose of impeachment is not to drive him out of office. I think he's going to will be gone out of office in a few days. I think this is important from the Democrats' perspective because it prevents, essentially box him in, preventing him from running office again in 2024. And I think this is going to be an important issue both for Democrats and the Republicans. You know, there are strong Republican contenders for the 2020 election potentially. People like Marco Rubio, even Ted Cruz is considering Mike Pence, Nikki Haley. All these people are thinking about running. I'm pretty sure they're all thinking about running in 2024 with President Trump standing in the way. The future for GOP in 2024 is going to be very dim, even though he still carries a lot of weight within the GOP, right? And of course, from Democrats' point of view, they don't want him to run. They don't want him. Probably a lot of Democrats, having gone through this horrible experience within the Capitol, they're probably wishing him go to jail, actually, right? I mean, there are several lawsuits against him at state level for which he cannot pardon himself. So he cannot pardon himself for state-level crime. So I think for both perspectives, for Democrats and GOP, I think it's quite important. It's more than just symbolic, in my view. It's full of substance, and we'll see what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I think this is a very good point about for the Democrats. If you listen to 60 Minutes interview with Nancy Pelosi,
right?
What she talked about is. For those rioters, one of their purpose is really to storm into the Capitol Hill and capture the Speaker of the House.
Right.
So it's a personal trauma. It's a personal, more than a shock.
Right.
Some of we talked about earlier. Some of the Democrats, the Congressperson. It's like life and death at that moment.
Right.
So it's not only about nation impeachment of the president, but also it's about the individual experience. It's like a near-death experience.
Right.
I think people rightly outraged with this riot.
You know what? I listened to some of the debates last night. Well, Beijing time is last night about impeachment in the Congress. I mean, I think the GOP's arguments, if you listen to a lot of these people talking, politicians talking about this, I mean, their argument is based on the argument that we have to move forward, right? It's time for unity. It's national healing time, But I have a problem with this kind of argument. The thing is that this is a clear violation of the law, and the most important law in the nation. That's the Constitution, right? And you're talking about a storming of the most sacrosanct symbol of power, right? I mean, people call it the temple of democracy or something like that. And this is, there's actually, in the academic community, they're talking about what exactly the definition of this thing. And a lot of people have been saying this is what's called a self-coup. So in any case, I think there got to be consequences for that, right? I mean, if there's no consequence, how can it be healing, okay? If there's no punishment, no accountability, how can we move forward? How can they move forward?
John, you were talking about President Trump being put into the jail, but how likely is that?
There's a couple of lawsuits against him at this point. And the Congress is initiating this one. That's the willful inciting of insurrection. There are several state-level cases. New York State is investigating his evading taxes, for example. There's another case, I think, it's just the Brooklyn local prosecutor in Brooklyn, in New York City. I think that's probably a more serious potential crime if he's convicted. That is to lie on his petition for loans, application for loans with the Deutsche Bank. I think this is a very serious crime, actually. I mean, if you are following the case, the United States government is going after Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou,
Right.
it's exactly based on the same argument, lying to the bank about flying for an application or a loan, right? So if he is accused of doing that, I think that's a pretty serious crime. So I think these two things are the most likely cases brought by the state level prosecutions.
But I'm no expert of law, but how likely is it for President Trump being impeached, over the 1 week or so period?
Okay, there's a separate question. Okay, all right. So my understanding is that Mitch McConnell has issued a letter basically saying that I don't have enough time. If I have to do this, we're going to do this on the afternoon of the inauguration, which is going to be after the Trump is already gone, right? But there's actually a dispute over this. Some Democrats think that it's still possible to impeach a president that's already left office, okay? But some legal scholars saying, well, that's not the interpretation of the Constitution. The Constitution clearly says that you can only impeach an incumbent president. By the time that we're going to discuss this in Congress, in Senate, he's already gone. So you can't impeach a president that's already left office. But some legal scholars said, look, there are some cases in the past, in history, where the Senate actually issued resolutions to censure senators who already left. So certainly there's an analogy can be made that, okay, if you can censure a senator that's already left, certainly you can impeach a president that's already left, right? So there are both arguments. So I think people are saying that, this is going to be ultimately determined by the Supreme Court. But, with the current judges sitting on the Supreme Court, if the case indeed goes to the Supreme Court, probably, I think it's quite unlikely that the Supreme Court will let the Senate to impeach him.
Now, I learned from the U.S. media that it is possible for a president to be impeached after he officially leaves office,
right,
as long as they got this 2/3
right,
of the vote.
Right.
How if that's possible? How likely would that be?
Well, that's one legal argument, basically. Right?
Given the composition of this of the House and the Senate.
Yeah, so you're talking about a procedural issue. I think
Right.
this is going to be heatedly contested in the Senate debates. People in the Senate the GOP senators who were opposed to this are going to say, well, look, we cannot do this. This is against the Constitution. We don't have the authorization to impeach a president that's no longer incumbent, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's possible that...
given the support rate to President Trump, how likely do you think the House of Representatives can get this 2/3 of vote?
Well, my understanding is that some GOP politicians have been saying that they have enough votes. Okay,
in the Senate.
In the Senate, yeah. For example, George Conway, for example, he's a very famous GOP never Trumper, right? He organized the Lincoln Project, against President Trump. He said that the anti-Trump camp has enough votes in the Senate. But we'll see. I think this is, I'm not exactly sure about the procedural aspect, if it's going to go to the Supreme Court or not. But I've seen some people saying that this ultimately will go to the Supreme Court. But if the case ends in the Supreme Court, I'm not very optimistic.
It's really, if you follow the procedure, of course, in the House of Representatives already they agreed to impeach him, and then the case, following the procedure, will go to the Senate. Right. It's really up to the Senate whether they have the 2/3 majority to convict him. Basically, you have Supreme Justice over there. It's like the president is being is alleged, and then you have the congressperson over there to file a crime against him. Right. But I think here is a political consideration. It's politics, probably.
Yeah.
Whether Republican senators or Republican majority of the senators say, let's say, is it the time to distance the Republican Party from Trump or Trumpism over here?
The purpose is, of course, is certainly not going to be drive him out of office. He's going to be out of office already. So, you're absolutely right. I think this is very political. But I also want to point out that even though, the surface looks very political, but the substance is really about an act whether it violates law, right? I mean, that's a legal matter. That's a legal matter. It's about law and order in this case, right? So we're talking about holding him accountable. The thing is that you can't really file a criminal charge against him because the burden of proof is going to be very high. The bar is going to be very high. He delivered a speech, right? Is there any causal relationship between that speech and the actions by this mob? Okay, so I think the standard is very different in a criminal court versus a impeachment trial in the Senate. So so I think I think the case for a criminal charge is off the table. I don't think it's likely, but
John, in terms of law, if it's tried in a normal court, yes, you require a lot of evidence, probably.
Absolutely.
But in the Senate, it's really, in terms of conviction, it's
right.
about a vote.
That's
Whether
right.
we have the 2/3,
Right,
of the senators, they vote say,
Yeah.
hey, he committed impeachable offenses over there,
That's right.
and then the Democrats and the Republican senators, most of them say, yeah, the president committed a crime, and then he's a criminal,
Right.
and then probably he will be transferred to the Supreme Court or whatever court, and to see like how many years he will be in the prison.
Yeah. It's a political sentence. Put it this way. It's a
Political sentence, let's
Exactly.
say. I mean, Mitch McConnell and Lisa Cheney, the number 3 in the Republican Party, basically has said that they agree they will vote for impeachment.
And talking about the speech delivered by Trump after he was impeached by the House, let me again turn to Harold for again, see if the connection is all right. Harold, Trump made a speech after the impeachment, obviously, calling for calm and denouncing violence, saying, and I quote, "No true supporter of mine could ever endorse political violence. No true supporter of mine could ever disrespect law enforcement or our great American flag." So what is your response to his 5-minute or so address? And it seems, to me, it seems like an attempt to distance himself from the charge of inciting an insurrection.
Yes, I mean, the problem with Donald Trump surely is that he says one thing and the next day says something completely different, but he doesn't relate the two to each other. So he doesn't explain why did he say, let's walk to the Capitol one day, and the next day say, no supporter of mine is pro-violence. But then again, when there was a violent demonstration of right extremism that clashed with Antifa, he said there were fine people on both sides, where obviously he didn't explicitly say that violence was not okay. So it's always this ambiguity which Trump tries to keep to please all his supporters, and also to not appear weak, so never walk back on his word. So it's very unclear what this statement means. But from the circumstances, he made this speech condemning violence in general after the talk of a second impeachment and even a criminal investigation has started. So it seems very tactical rather than political to say, well, to protect myself, now I have to say some things that work as proof in court or in an impeachment trial to say I'm not the guy who wants violence. I don't think it's credible. But again, the problem is, of course, this is a political question. Is it a credible statement or is it a tactical statement? So I'm not jealous of the people who have to justify the impeachment, because I do realize that a lot of people are really blindly following Trump to whatever he says or does, and how to keep a country together where the people don't just live in two separate opinions of what should be done, but in two separate worlds or assessments of how the reality really is. So I think that's really the challenge, and an impeachment trial cannot help with that challenge. I think it's necessary as a warning, but how to lead a country that is basically split in half, not geographically, but from society, because it's really close to half the population that does support Trump, which is surprising to outsiders, but we have to acknowledge that's the political reality in the US.
Right. Qingzhe, do you think don't you think President Trump could be concerned that his speech denouncing violence, or whatever you call it, violent protests, could trigger some anger among his supporters?
Right.
Right.
But anyway, probably some of his supporters would say, "Hey, we are here. We are at the front line, right? We are putting our livelihood at risk. But somehow now you are trying to pull out, trying to withdraw from the confrontation." People would be at least disappointed. Some of his staunch supporters maybe. But I think it's too late. It's useless for Trump. Trump is trying to distance himself from violence, from the riot. No, I think the Congress, in particular the Democrats, they are determined to impeach him and to drive him basically out of this office as soon as possible. They can't wait even for 7 days until he finishes his term. So that's the anger, from the other side of the political of the aisle, and even the Republicans. From what I see, some of them are beginning to distance themselves from Trump. One of the congresspersons saying that, "Oh, I should have denounced the violence. I should have denounced this fraudulent allegation earlier. All of us should have done that earlier to avoid this riot." But I think of course it's a personal decision right now. Some of the Republican senators or the congressperson, they would say whether my constitution, whether the Trump supporters, Trumpism is strong over there. It's about my re-election. It's about my political future, or should I say? Up in the front saying Donald Trump, Trumpism, I have nothing to do with it. I don't want to have anything to do with it in the future. So it's their personal choice. It's about the political future.
John, do you think Trump really means it? A decrease in violence, or he just said so, but with some underline to indicating, or actually?
I don't have any faith in an inkling of what he said.
He's a liar.
Well, we have to listen to his speech very carefully. I think I think there will be very few people, his people, who think that they feel like they are betrayed. I think a lot of people have that understanding. They think that he's being persecuted. They think that he has to use force to say something like this. He's made a martyr in a way. Political model in a way, and they have their, and he has their understanding, basically, I think. And another thing is that we have to be very careful with his speech, the words he chose. He speaks in a sort of a coded language, actually, right? On one side, he said, "Okay, I denounce violence," and the other side, he said, "Well, he said, I understand your pain," something like that. So I think people are going to interpret his words sort of very selectively, and he still has a staunch following, measured in the millions, and these people are going to be with him no matter what. It's going to be a very difficult problem in my view. There's always going to be a group of people in the United States who are vehemently opposed to the system, vehemently following him, they just steadfastly believe that this is a rigged election, okay, there are fraudulent events in this election, which is totally not true.
That's why his supporters, the writers, they call this is a revolution.
Yeah.
This is something serious. They
That's
are
right.
doing their best to correct the rigged election. They don't believe any allegation against them, like a riot, like insurrection, or that kind of allegation. Even look at the Secretary of State. He tweeted yesterday, Beijing time, basically saying that wokeism, political correctness, promoted by the left, by the liberal, is wrong. He wants to restore the American faith. So this is basically he's speaking to the Trump supporters over there, obviously. Yes, that's right. That's also the argument by the Republicans, saying that we needed to heal our country, we needed to fight for unity.
That's a bogus argument. There's a bogus argument. I mean, I'm actually quite surprised that not many Democrats stand up against this very bogus argument. I keep saying this, without consequence, without accountability for something that is clearly violating the most important piece of legislation, the most important piece of law in the land. how can there be any moving forward? How can there be any healing? How can there be any unity, right? So I think, without reckoning for this, very great thing, the issue cannot move forward. It will keep coming back.
They should have talked about that, before this riot. Let's move forward. Let's fight for unity. There's no rigged election. There's no fraud, right? That sense. But also, for the Democrats, this is more than impeachment. They want to. Obviously, there is a serious crackdown against Trump and Trumpism. Right. They know this is the chance. If they missed it, and Trumpism will be there and probably will be thriving for the next 4 years, it would be a great challenge for the Biden administration, so-called in his efforts to heal the society. It's a mission impossible.
Right.
And here's a reminder, you are watching us live streaming from Beijing, and we are talking about the impeachment of President Donald Trump, which happened just a few hours ago. And John, you were talking about this Constitution. Is it very less likely that the 25th Amendment to the Constitution being invoked?
No, I think it's highly unlikely. Pence sent a letter to Nancy Pelosi saying that he basically raised two arguments. One, I think, is quite legitimate, actually. The other one is totally bogus, as I said. Basically, the second argument is exactly as you said. He's talking about cleaning, he's talking about moving forward, right? So we've already rejected this argument. The first argument, according to Michael Pence, is that, the 25th Amendment is, as per the Constitution, is only going to be invoked when there's some kind of a medical problem, some psychological problem associated with, associated with the president, right? So it's not a political issue here. So you can't, invoke the 25th Amendment if he's doing something not right, or if he's not good, right? He has to be mentally ill for this amendment to be invoked. So he's making this argument. I think this is quite a legitimate argument, actually. To be honest with you, even though I very much like to see the 25th Amendment to be invoked, but it appears to be a legitimate argument, and I think I would leave it to the legal scholars to debate whether what's the true interpretation of the 25th Amendment. But at least the face value, I think he made a very good point. So in any case, only a few days left. This administration officials, this cabinet, I don't think they're going to invoke the 25th Amendment. No, it's not going to happen.
It's off the table.
It's off the table.
Right.
It's also the interesting point you mentioned about only a few days left. That's also the Republican argument. Only a few days left. What's the hurry? Why? Yeah. What's the point of driving him out of the office? Anyway, 7 days or 6 days later, he will be gone.
The crux of that argument is basically using a political solution to resolve a legal problem, and I don't think that's right. I think that's they're trying to water down a very grave crime, in my view, and frame it in a political context, and I think that's not right.
Right. You're watching us live streaming from Beijing, and if you have any questions to ask or any comments you want made, please tweet us. And let's go to Harold for another time. Harold, we've seen former UK Foreign Secretary David Miliband saying the United States is facing a danger of Balkanization, which is a term used to describe the breakup of the Balkans. So what is your take on that? Do you see it happening?
Yes, I'm very happy for this question because I tried to join with long distance. Very difficult to find it. The point I want to make is I disagree with the notion that once Trump is impeached and removed from the office, that then the US nation can move forward as a united country. That's not going to happen because the Trump supporters will see this only as a further proof that this democratic side of politics is doing everything to remove them from having a voice. Now, I don't really agree with this. I'm convinced the Democrats are acting out of their sense of justice. At the same time, it's also wrong if, let's say, left-leaning Americans now see they stormed the Capitol to overthrow the vote. In effect, that's what would have happened. But what the people who stormed the Capitol were thinking is they want to protect the people's will because they're so convinced their president is the only one who tells the truth about the election being faked and rigged by illegal elements in the system. So that brings me to the term balkanization. It's two different world views that people live in, and it's very hard to reconcile these different views. And the typical or the very unique thing in the Balkan Civil War was that it's much less two sides that were fighting against each other. It was a society that was one country first, suddenly started talking about some roots that they had, and neighbors turned to enemies, and people started killing each other who used to have, lunch together 2 years before that. And so I think this, I hope we're not getting to the point where people start killing each other in the civil war. But what's already happened is that really neighbors, best friends, even families split apart and are being split in different worldviews. And I think really split something that was one society before turns into different factions that cannot talk to each other, they can't stand each other, they live in a different world. It's not just political differences, it's a difference in assessing what reality is. And this is very dangerous, and we'll see how it will be mended, if it can be mended, but definitely it's very challenging. And it depends a lot on the media. If the media can get together and find some kind of shared reality, then okay, then there's hope. If that's not happening, then there's very little hope how the US society can get better. I don't think Trump gone will just end the problem. I think the problem is going on for much longer than Trump as a person.
Well, Harold, it would be much better if we could have you in the studio. Once again, back to our studio, John. Do you see any hope in the U.S. society right now?
I probably won't bet that the U.S. is going to go the direction of a balkanized nation. There's going to be a civil war kind of a thing, even though people have been saying there's already a cold civil war going on for many years already. But in any case, I think overall, the kind of people supporting him, I think most of them are just politically motivated. They're not like going to pick up arms and revolt. I think that represents a very small set of people. People like the Proud Boys, for example, right? Mm-hmm. President Trump says stand back and stand by. Yeah. Doesn't look this time he's probably not saying that anymore. But overall, the U.S. political establishment, the military, the police, the law and order organizations, they are still firmly in the hands of people who are very rational, okay? I'm pretty sure this time FBI is going after these militia groups. One thing I discover, it's actually quite surprised to me that I probably underestimate the development of the militia development in the United States. Appears to be a lot larger in size and influence than I previously thought. But as large as they are at this moment, but I don't think that they're going to be the mainstream, even among the Trump supporters. And the law enforcement organizations are going to relentlessly going to go after them. So I probably won't bet that there's going to be a sort of a balkanized situation in the United States. There are going to be turmoils. There are going to be violence, I would say. There will be incidents. Even the United States too many guns. I think these people have guns, so there might be even cases like that here and there. But overall, the system still has political system still has its very fair share of resiliency, as we have witnessed this time.
And there's this argument that you both may not agree with, that it is better for the United States to split into two states. The country is big enough to host two presidents. And if that's the case, it would be better for the world to be more peaceful, less intervention in other countries. And I don't know, what's your take on that,
Let
Chingo?
me first this is actually like a joke. Before you talk, let me just give a joke. There's a joke about breaking up the United States into two parts. The two coasts, eastern and western coasts, right? They can join Canada to form the United States of Canada, and then what's in the middle, it's called the red, Jesus land, right? That's a joke. But go ahead.
But they would intervene with each other's affairs. So the rest of the world will be peaceful in that sense. Right. But of course, I agree with John. I think the establishment, if you look at their response, the feedback against Trump and his supporters, not only is the law enforcement, but also if you look at the donations from the business community. They basically said they are boycotting all those Republican senators or congresspersons. Like, if you stay with Trump, we will stop continuation of donating to your political campaigns. So that's a lot of pressure. Even for, I think for Senator Hawley, the book contract is being cancelled. Remember, and also there's a lot of pressure on the, I would say, on the Trump administration. The latest is that there's a content editor from Forbes, the magazine.
I was about to mention this.
Yeah, he's calling for any business, any companies, if you want to hire anyone, basically, he names 3 of them from the Trump administration, Conway, etc. If you hire them, and then we know your company is full of lies, so we would have no faith in your company.
I have to point out, Forbes is actually a very right-leaning magazine, right? So it's a very right-leaning magazine.
See, they can't tolerate this kind of...
Even Forbes can come out and make a statement like this. That tells a lot about,
that's too far away. But still, I think will be problems. The problems will persist for a long time. We do see 2 Americas, basically. One America is the right-wing, is more conservative socially, and also more traditional over there. And then you have this 2 coasts over there that's more left, more liberal, more globalist, let's say. So these 2 Americas, somehow it's very hard for them to compromise with each other. And also look at the writers. Almost 100% of them are white people over there.
Exactly.
And then there's this kind of concern, which has been there for a long time, population-wise.
You know what? I think the demographic trend points to a direction that it's more than just the 2 coastal areas. I think a lot of many big cities in the south, like Dallas-Fort Worth area, for example, Houston, Atlanta, Charlottesville in North Carolina. These states are becoming, these big cities are attracting more and more professionals, minorities as well. Cities keep expanding. A lot of the Democrat votes coming from the South actually coming from these big metropolises, and I think that's a major demographic trend that's working against the GOP's future. So we'll see what's going to happen in the future.
The GOP always they have this worry that with the dwindling, comparatively speaking, of the white population, the chances for them to win a presidency is getting more difficult. You have more immigrants, so-called colored people. They are more likely to vote for the Democrats. And then, so there's a kind of sense of crisis for the white people. They are becoming somehow like a minority in this traditionally white country. That's probably part of the reason why some of the supporters of Trump, they say this election Trump should have a second term.
It's called a majority-minority states. Several sites in the South are becoming like majority-minority states where the whites are becoming minorities. Like Arizona is happening. I think it's already turning blue this time. Who would have imagined that the state that produced Barry Goldwater, right? That's the father of conservatism, could have been to a blue state at this point. And a couple of others, Georgia this time, and I think it's quite likely in 4 years, Texas will probably become the same thing.
Blue state?
Yeah, become blue state. And probably maybe even Florida will have a chance next in the next election.
I also want to add that it's also part of the, I would say, consequence of this widening gap between rich and poor, between rural areas and urban areas. If you see the middle class and the lower income people over the past basically 3 decades, their livelihood or their living standard remains unchanged, if not getting worse. So people have genuine grievances against the system. What's wrong with the system? It's like it's not our country anymore. It's like our voice is not being heard. If you look at the news network over there, basically that's the voice of the establishment, of the elite, of the liberal. What about the rest of America?
She obviously has a lot of concern or care about the poor in the States.
But that's true for any country. If the widening gap continues, there will be a problem. Look at now, the way to save American economy, to solve this crisis, pandemic crisis, is really to printing the money, right? Okay, you can print the money, and the stock market is booming actually. Remember, 20% of the rich people, they are in possession of 80% of the stock, of the stocks. So they will get richer and richer. For the rest of the country, 80% of the Americans, they are getting poorer because of the pandemic, because of the economic crisis over there. And this kind of crisis, deepening the gap, and then there will be some problem like, extremism, nationalism, populism will grow. So there will be a social crisis after this. They got to be careful about that, I guess.
We obviously have to be careful of this continuous chaos, if you may, in the States. And we've already talked a lot about the impact in the States or on this country. What about the impact on other countries? I know we are a bit far from the center of the storm, right? But do you see any influence, say, on China? Or this question to each of you.
Well, it's a big topic actually. Of course, if you look at China and the U.S. as a peer competitors, not the Chinese point of view, but many Americans view China as a peer competitor, if not a rival or even enemy. In that sense, if they are competing with each other, mostly they are competing with which country is managing a better society, is managing a better economy, right? That's a true competition. In that sense, the U.S. is struggling a little bit, at least for the next couple of years. So I think if you look at Chinese performance in terms of dealing with the pandemic, in terms of the economic growth, the only major economy with a positive growth, I think China is doing much better than the U.S. Then in that sense, you would say, of course, there's also a lesson for China to learn, what happened to the U.S. We want to avoid anything similar to that, like the gap between rich and poor, or the division of the society, divisiveness of the society. You don't want to have that in China. And I think for the rest of the world, in particular for this like European countries, for U.S. allies, there's more than worry, as even a fear, what's happening in the United States that could happen in European countries, because that's similar, kind of a populism. People are not happy, discontent with their governments. It's there. It's really about whether there's an opportune chance for them to, like a volcano, the eruption. When sometimes it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So for the government, I think they are under pressure. Maybe they get the message, they will do something to avoid that.
At least it serves as an alert to the rest of the world. John?
Well, I think this is happening in Washington. Certainly is a big lesson for here in China. First of all, I would say we should look at this sort of in a more positive way, instead of hoping that things will even get worse in the United States, because after all, I think falling apart in the United States is not in the interest of China. We still want to see a sort of a more stabilized economy, and we still like to see that trade and business relationships will be getting back to normal as it used to be. I think the second big lesson is that no matter, first of all, we certainly see very clearly this time the pitfalls of a so-called democracy system in the United States. But aside from this point, I think it's very important to realize that fascism can really rise in any political system, even in a political system as like in the United States. What Trump has been doing, in my view, is textbook definition of fascism. He has called the press the enemy of the people. He has stirred racial tensions. He has incited a mob to storm, the Capitol. And all these things fit the very definition of fascism. And I think, as you point out, this is coming from a broader economic, political context. It's a very difficult time at this point, but the populism, even I would call it sort of a nationalism, racially oriented thinking, all these things ultimately will be blowing out of control. Even in a sort of a perceived as very stable political system in the United States, what's called the world's oldest democracy, right? A democratic republic. So this is a grave lesson in my view. I think we have to be very careful about things like this happening in other parts of the world, not just in the United States. As you mentioned, there's a emergence of developments of things like this in Europe too. And I would say even here in China, be very careful. Like the proliferation of nationalistic thinking, for example, can lead to something out of control, and we have to be very, very careful about playing that card.
Well, exactly. I think if you look at the U.S., on one hand, people would say it's more difficult for the U.S. to export democracy and freedom. Probably look at what happened to Uganda, the upcoming presidential election. The U.S. monitors basically they were rejected for visa application, so they are warning. There's a lack of transparency. Basically, they are criticizing Uganda election over there. But then, even Americans would say, oh, we're not that confident, we're not in that position to criticize other countries for their election problems over there. And then the spokesperson for the Uganda government or the president is saying that, what's the last time that we sent monitors to the United States? We need like an international group of people to monitor the US election. The issue is like, I often joke that U.S. spend too much time taking care of the rest of the world. Sometimes they forget to take care of themselves. Nation building, for example, their efforts in, of course, war and so-called nation building in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, it caused more problems than progress, right? And I would advise them, taking care. Spend more time taking care of yourself.
Right.
Every country should take care of themselves, and then the world will become much better. Right.
Hopefully, what's happening in the United States won't become a political pandemic sweeping across the globe. Last but not least, we again go to Harold. We start with you, and we want to end this discussion with you. Harold, what do you see, or what influence do you see would the impeachment of President Trump would have on other countries in the world?
Yes, I would start before on the discussion where I feel we should not make the mistake to talk too much about what do the people say and what this person or that person say. That's much too personalizing the problem. I think there needs to be also a bigger view on the institutional question. The US has a political system that's been slightly updated, but essentially is more than 150 years old. It's based on a world where there was no radio, no TV, let alone social media. And I think what we saw now is just the realization that if a political system doesn't evolve with the technology and economic developments, then it's really difficult to keep it effective. And that's something that influences the world for sure. A lot of people used to look up to the US as the shining light and something aspirational. Nowadays, countries will ask, well, if the US does not handle COVID, if the US does not ensure people are well fed, have enough to eat, have warm homes, even though it's such a rich country, then obviously there's something wrong in the country. And we cannot blame that on individual politicians or on the way that people vote. Clearly, there are institutional issues that just do not enable such a rich country to make good lives possible for everyone. And I think this will be the biggest impact on the world. It's not about who pressures, who do the Americans interfere in other countries, do other countries interfere in America or somewhere else. It's more about what do people look up to? What do people strive for to become like? I see some countries in Europe, especially Northern Europe, are generally still doing very well and have a very balanced welfare. The wealth gap is not too extreme, yet they're doing economically still very well. And of course, we cannot ignore the way China has evolved positively over the last 30 years. That's very attractive for Southeast Asian countries, for more and more African countries as well. So I think this is the big change. What will people look up to globally? Not individual countries' leaders, but more in general, economists, sociologists, but also common people, non-scientists. What are the ideals that we strive for? And I think China has the advantage that it has a system that keeps changing, that keeps adapting and evolving. It's much faster in evolution. Europe has the advantage that it has a quite well-established system where a lot of people feel they're represented. But we will see. Definitely, it's kind of the shine of the US as this aspirational, ideal country that everybody wants to be like. That has definitely come off over the last 4 years. But I would argue, really, the last 4 years have just been a manifestation of what's been happening, at least since George Bush Jr., some say even a lot longer, that reality and that became less and less important, and emotions, even religious aspects became more and more important in being able to shine on TV rather than to manage the country. This direction has been going on for a long time. So I'd say this has been a very stark manifestation now, with a TV star basically becoming president and doing everything for the camera rather than for the country. So we may be in for a more unstable period of time where this unipolar world is now really starting to end. So from an institutional perspective, my big question is, how will the US reform their institutions, and how will the world reform the global institutions, that they can be less Euro-US centric and be more integrated globally? So from
Right. Thank you very much. I think the world, the entire world is watching, right? All we can say is best wishes to the United States and its people. And let's hope that things can calm down very soon. And thank you all for joining the discussion this time. Hopefully we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we can have a little chat.